What shall we drink to, Mr. Bond?
How about an earthquake?
In light of the Haitian earthquake from 2010, the joke planned for this segment has been withheld. Hi, I'm Kevin from the SDP, and this is the 007 Diamond Jubilee. Our story starts at the United Nations in New York, where the British ambassador is killed. Then we jump to New Orleans, where a British agent is killed. And then we jump to the island of Saint Monique, where another British agent is killed. It's up to James Bond to investigate the common thread linking these assassinations. The producers did try to convince Sean Connery to stay on with Bond, but when he declined, the search for 007 began anew. The lead role went to Roger Moore, previously of the TV series The Saint. Two things that define his portrayal of Bond are, 1, his encyclopedic knowledge, useful for giving exposition at a moment's notice.
You see, by pulling out this button, sir, it turns the watch into a hyper-intensified magnetic field.
And 2, his propensity for scumbag actions. For example, seducing a girl via trickery and taking away her alleged psychic powers by boning her. Roger Moore went on to play James Bond 7 times, a record unless you count the films not produced by Eon, and while I'll tell you up front that his work spans both ends of the spectrum in terms of quality, at least his role in Live and Let Die lies somewhere in the middle. The aforementioned romantic prey is Solitaire, Dr. Kananga's private fortune teller. Unusually for the reality-based 007 franchise, Solitaire's tarot reading powers appear to be real until Bond beds her and she loses them. This may seem to many as a chauvinistic jerk move on Bond's part, but who knows, maybe her boss was a lousy lover.
You have found yourself.
Said boss is Dr. Kananga, Prime Minister of the Caribbean nation Saint Monique. He's in cahoots with Mr. Big, an African-American crime boss, as part of a plot to monopolize America's supply of heroin. It's a shame Mr. Big didn't get much of a chance to establish his character as opposed to Kananga. There's a reason for that, but it would go into spoiler territory, and it would have been a nice twist too, but for the relatively limited characterization of Mr. Big, so I'm just gonna move on. A number of henchmen are assigned to guard the collective interests of Kananga and Mr. Big, including Baron Samedi, the supposed voodoo god of death. He always comes back after being killed, but not nearly given enough to do given his potential, so his alleged voodoo power is rather unnaturally established and utilized. More of the script is dedicated to T.H. Johnson, who has a metal pincher for an arm, and some decent chemistry with his prey. However, this movie also gives us one of the worst, no, dare I say it, the worst character in the entire Bond franchise.
By the powers invested in me by this parish, I hereby do commandeer this vehicle and all those persons within. And that means you, smart ass.
Oh god. Sheriff J.W. Pepper, a Louisiana sheriff chasing after Bond and Mr. Big's men alike for traffic violations. He's entirely inconsequential in said boat chase, and he's way too crass for the atmosphere promoted by the presence of 007. I just hate him. As Roger Moore's Bond expo dumped about earlier, he uses a wristwatch with a magnet and a buzzsaw. Yet he leaves out any mention of the buzzsaw, which out of nowhere is used in the finale. Still, they did one thing I liked. There's a scene at an alligator farm where Bond is trapped on a small island with the deadly reptiles closing in. He tries to use the watch to attract a metal canoe, but surprise, surprise, it's tethered, forcing him to escape another way. Now that's using your wits. I was talking to the writers. The theme song is performed by Paul McCartney and Wings. Hey, remember in Goldfinger when Bond said that drinking warm wine was as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs? I bet he felt a little silly after this movie came out, especially given that, with this being the first rock genre Bond theme, it's got some decent bite. But there's a reggae breakdown in the middle which, although it ties into the Caribbean setting of the film, clashes with everything else in the song. But come on, we're dealing with the next Beatle here, he deserves to get away with a stunt like that. Also, this song's got a really good cover by Guns N' Roses on their second album, Use Your Illusion, so you should check that out too. The motifs in the opening credits include fires, skulls, and a whole bunch of black women, and together they form a cohesive theme that fits the film's subject matter. And despite being limited by the production values of the day, on the whole it works. One pattern we will be noticing with James Bond in the 1970s is that these films tended to latch onto a certain trend. In the case of Live and Let Die, that would be the blaxploitation genre. Despite the obvious cross-marketing and tendencies towards slapstick gimmicks, it's nice to know that Live and Let Die has a decent plot holding it up. It's a shame the next film could not maintain that same balance of style and substance, but we'll talk about that next time on the 007 Diamond Jubilee. For now, Live and Let Die scores 70%, a C+.
Quite revealing.